wow, you know, I used to grow up getting press clippings all the time. Me and my grandmother, when I'll never forget when we had when the Ravens won the Super Bowl the first time around, we took all the press clippings from the Ravens Super Bowl, their run to the Super Bowl, and we had like this banner that we made, and it was like on a purple sheet, and it was all Baltimore Sun press clippings of the Ravens. And then for me to go and take see my name in that same paper 20 years later or 19 years later at that point, it was just so cool to see. And I was excited about it.
Y'all know baseball is my favorite sport. From it being the sport I played first to my love for the Baltimore Orioles, it's the one sport that I always enjoy. My guest on today's show is somebody whom I recruited to work with me mainly for baseball coverage during my time at Fox Sports 1340. Unfortunately, 2 days after his recruitment, I left. That is the one and only Kyle Andrews. Kyle comes on. He is currently a high school sports writer for the Baltimore Sun newspaper. So, ladies and gentlemen, get ready as you learn about Kyle's journey, which includes his journey as a writer, but also how he overcame cancer during this time. Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle Andrews. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on the line is somebody who I admire, crossed path with very briefly before I made an exit at Fox Sports 1340. But I have to say he was, dare say, my last recruit. And when I recruited him, I was like, oh, yeah, I finally got somebody I'm able to piggyback off baseball with. But then things happen, which we'll get into one day. And that is the one and only, the Kyle Andrews. Kyle, what's up, bro?
How's it going, man? It's good to join you and talk about my career and everything. I'm excited.
Yeah, man, very excited to have you on. Obviously I've been watching you, keeping up with you. The one thing we got to get done though is I have to get my autograph. As I sit here, I'm looking at the direction where your first clip from the Baltimore Sun rests on my I have this scrapbook that my wife made me before we were married, and all this really cool stuff. It was a 2012 Christmas gift, and inside is your first article. So I got to get that signed
And
from
that's
you.
awesome. I didn't even know you had that, but that's awesome to
Yeah,
hear.
I mean, I took a picture of it on social media. I had to keep it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
But
that's always fun.
yeah, man. So how first and foremost, before we jump in, how are you doing? As we're still recording, we're still in the midst of two pandemics, the racial pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic. How are you holding up?
I'm doing pretty well. Everything's going pretty well. Just try to make sure I'm staying aware of everything that's been going on. And I think that's the main important thing, especially as a sports journalist. To just stay aware with the social issues too. I think a lot of people get wrapped up in this. You just got to stick to sports, and I don't necessarily agree with the notion. Sports have a lot of things. I mean, it's a lot of things in sports that have to do with social justice in general. So I mean, staying woke on those issues is just as important as staying woke on the sports issues as well. So we just need to all keep that in mind, especially when we're going through times like these.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we all human, so that's the one thing that's important. We all have to still understand what's going on in life, and so obviously I'm glad you're doing well. We keep in contact on a regular basis, but I'm really excited today as we jump into your career. When did you decide that journalism was for you?
So it's funny. I was actually a exercise science major when I was in college, and so I think you know I got to the point where I realized I was a pretty good writer, and I'm like, this whole exercise science, I mean, you have to remember so many things in Latin. And then I wanted to be an athletic trainer. And I'm like, man, if I can't remember this and I'm getting, C minuses on things and in college, I'm just like, yeah, this stuff isn't for me. Like athletic training is absolutely not for me. And then come to find out, I was a pretty good writer. I mean, everything worked out pretty well. And I'm like, man, I want to stick with sports. And so I decided, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to write for my school blog, with the McDaniel Free Press, which was our, school newspaper. And that ended up going pretty well, but then I had to transfer. So, you know, it was a lot of moving parts over the years with my sports journalism career, but it was always something I was kind of interested in that I just decided to make a career after a while.
Okay. So now so you decided that while you was in college, as opposed to being, you went to a prestigious school in Mount St. Joe. That was the time you were focused on the exercise part. Let me make sure I got
Y-
that straight.
yes.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
how far did you go into Latin? See, in my high school, Baltimore City College, we had to take a Latin class, and the pledge is in Latin. Nobody remembers it. The only thing they remember is omnibus at the end. How far did you have to go into Latin?
Well, so it was funny. So I didn't take a Latin class. It was just that you had to memorize a number of medical terms in Latin, especially considering that, like, everything in the body has a Latin term. You know, I,
Mm.
every muscle, every ligament, every bone, etc., tendon, all those things. They all have Latin terms, and that was the thing that was so tough to me because I had trouble with foreign languages in general. Now, Latin is very tough to learn, especially considering that it's a dead language. So you don't necessarily have people that really speak the language anymore, except for in church, occasionally. I'm Catholic, so we hear Latin every once in a while, but not even that often. So I think that's something that I think got me to the point where I'm like, you know what? I need to just make sure. I mean, I got a pretty good handle on the English language, so let me make my way in that way and just become a better writer and work on my craft. So everything worked out to the best. You know, and I definitely, I mean, I think that it's funny how I started isn't necessarily the most interesting thing that I would have to say about my story. I guess how I first got into it. I won't say how I started. How I started is a little bit different than how I decided. Okay, I want to do this, but I can get into that as well.
Yeah, well, go ahead, go right into it.
Okay, so first things first. I mean, I was at McDaniel and I transferred. I actually went to CCBC. That for a whole year in between my transfer to University of Baltimore. But
Hmm.
when I was at CCBC, I actually interned for Pressbox Online, um, and that was a very enlightening experience as well. That's actually where I met Glenn Clark, another one of my really good friends. Glenn helped me out quite a bit after a while too. Just getting my name out there. Um, and then after that, I actually interned. I wrote for Bullets Forever and the Baltimore Wire with another good friend of ours, Joe Serpico. And Joe was my editor over at the Baltimore Wire, which is a fan-sided site. I don't. I think fan-sided actually got rid of their local sites, but it was fun while it lasted, while I was over there, and then ended up writing for Bullets Forever with SB Nation. And then during that time, after my first year at University of Baltimore, so that was 2016, 2017 year. Um, that's when I got in contact. Me and you had followed each other for a while at that point, and I reached out to you, and I'm like, man, I didn't even realize you had an internship over there. And so I'm like, man, you know what? I can write about the Orioles. I can write about the Ravens. And then you told me about the possibility of press credentials, and I'm like, press credentials as a 23-year-old to cover the Orioles. I'm like, how? I'm like, this is the wildest thing. Let me try and do that. And sure enough, by June, I had the internship in May. Then we turned around in June, and I was already in the press box. So covering a team that I had worked for in the past. I was on the event staff the year before, and I was on the grounds crew for 2 years in 2011 and 2012. So it was just really wild to be able to cover the Orioles after I had already done those things, and I knew so many different people, and I was able to eventually parlay that into working for 105.7 The Fan, our local sports radio station. And then after that, after covering the Ravens for a year, covering the Orioles, covering the Terps, I got to cover high school sports with Baltimore Sun. So that's how it all ended up.
Well, one of the things too was, so like you said, we've been following each other. And when I started the Around the Bases of Birdland podcast, you would tune in and listen, comment, and it allowed us to really engage in conversation. And I was sitting there and I knew our baseball coverage could be better. I knew, like, we had, shout out to Hugh Scott. He was always the videographer, photographer. And if he had to, he would, write and tweet. But we had a couple other people. We had Byron Dixon, who was also working at the time. We had Damaris Dye. Those two guys was with the Flex Zone, but there was, it was kind of off and on. And I knew that with baseball season, it's such a grind. So I was like, man, if I can get Kyle on board, this would be great. And then I was also looking, I said, well, shoot, if Kyle could come on, we could do the podcast together. Us doing a podcast together, you got two, let's call it for what it is, two Black guys talking baseball that know what we talking about. Because for me growing up, baseball has always been my favorite sport. That's the reason why, like, when you see Adam Jones, that was my dream. That's probably the reason why he's my favorite player, because I wanted to be the Black guy, face of the Orioles growing up. And, he's a year and 6 days older than me. But that was who I wanted to be, face of the franchise. And so bringing you on, I was like, man, this is a great opportunity. But then, things happen, and I got into it with somebody who doesn't deserve to be named. And once we got into it, I was like, well, sorry, I got to go. But I felt good that I was like, well, at least, because it's still, you got Ashley Baker, Kelsey Nelson, Brandon Williams, all these people who I'm like really close to, who I recruited and brought on to the brand. I still wanted the brand to do well. I just couldn't be there anymore. But that was like, if when I look back in the past 5 years, that was definitely one of the most disappointing things in my career, was not being able to work with you long enough to really establish something.
Yeah, man. I feel like I still think back to that, and especially after, like, Joe came along too. I'm like, man, we really, like, to think what we could have had with
Mm-hmm.
you, me, Joe, and eventually one of my old high school classmates, Eric Himmelheber, ended up coming along too. And I'm
Yep.
like, man, we really could have been running something really good over there too. And it's just like, man, sometimes it's disappointing, to think what could have been, but then the possibilities that you have, that you open up to now. I mean, it's still some good things that have been done, and there's still some great work to be done.
Yeah. Um, and when you look back at that, what was your highlight during your time with Fox before we, move on to 105.7 and so on? What was your highlight? You spoke about that opportunity to get press credentials, but what was your big highlight during that time?
So I would say my biggest highlight was just being able to just go down to the park and talk with the players on a more equal footing. I think sometimes when I was on a grounds crew, it was just like I was like this kid, that was just working on a grounds crew that was, a little immature and things like that, making jokes and taking water bottles out of the cooler that were for the players, and just doing goofy stuff. But then, like, as a 23-year-old instead of a 18-year-old. I got to talk with these players, and I could relate with them a little bit more. They were my age, and getting to talk with Manny Machado, a guy I grew up watching. Same thing with Adam Jones and Jonathan Scope. It was interesting to be able to talk to those guys and just pick their brain on some of the things that went on, on a day-to-day level of baseball. And then not only that, but like, you know, I mean, I was one of the people that got to talk with Chris Davis, after he, and this was actually when I was with 105.7, but that kind of continued. But when I talked with Chris Davis, I asked him, I'm like, he was struggling that last year at the beginning of the season, and I just asked him, I'm like, Chris, what are your thoughts? Like, what's going through your mind? And he just sat there and answered me thoroughly. And I felt like, the players, they build that respect for you the longer you cover those teams. And the more they get to know you and they see you around, they're like, man, you're doing your thing. So it was just that recognition that the players would give you. And I might not be a Rock Kabaka, or I might not be a Steve Molesky, or Brittany Giroli when she was here, and all the other people, John Mioli and Nathan, with Ruiz with the Sun. But the thing is, they still respect me because I've been able to, work with those guys and talk with them for, quite a bit of time, even though now I'm covering high school sports. So it's still fun.
Now, can you talk about, gaining that respect? Because I know for young reporters, and I'll even put myself in out there, sometimes it can be intimidating. You go into these locker rooms, you see these athletes who, like you said, you grew up watching Manny Machado's. You and Adam Jones had a relationship since you were on the grounds crew. Can you talk about flipping hats? Two things: flipping hats from grounds crew to reporter, but also not being intimidated when you're going in there reporting, especially when it's a team that you love.
Well, so I think the biggest thing as a reporter, especially covering, I feel like my situation is so, like, you know, unique, and not, I mean, other people get to cover teams that they grew up watching. Daniel Oyefusi is a perfect example. Daniel's great, and he's a Towson guy, and he's now covering the Ravens and the Terps, and he went to UMD. And I think, like, the things that we learn, and specifically, I'll speak for myself, that I learned is that, you just have to go in there and make sure you're being professional. You can't go in there being a fanboy or a fangirl and thinking, that the players will immediately respect you. The first thing that you have to do is listen to the other reporters that have been on a beat longer than you have. You know, if you just sit there and immediately think you're going to go in and ask like 500 questions and step on people's toes, that's not going to get you any respect from the players, let alone the other people that you work with, because, ultimately, those are the people that you're going to talk with more often. They're going to drop some knowledge on you that you might need. And I think you need to build that rapport with other beat reporters as well. It was a perfect example is when I went to, when I went to cover the Terps occasionally. The Terps were probably, I would say they were my secondary beat. I was mostly an Orioles guy,
Mhm.
but I got to talk with some of the student reporters as well on the Terps beat, because they're doing it just as often as I am, if not twice as much more. So you need to, if you're covering college sports, trust me, those student run newspapers are extremely important. They're just as much of real journalists as we are. They're doing things on a regular basis, and I think people, when they get into those newer, environments, they need to just like pick other reporters' brains. The more you learn from them, the more respect that you'll gain in the locker room by asking, those right questions.
Yeah, and that's important, because you don't want to come out. like you said, you don't want to come out asking a bunch of questions and most importantly, stepping on other people's toes. Because one thing I did learn about the art of journalism, sure, the papers and the TV stations are competing, but when you really follow a lot of these journalists, you really see that they have a special bond and family because you'll see the selfies with each other. You'll see somebody, we'll use our local stations. You'll see somebody from Channel 13 comment on somebody from Channel 11's posts, say, hey, I saw a good job or whatever. So, and because a lot in some of those cases, they aren't from here. So they trying to bond with somebody who has a similar lifestyle. So, I'm glad you was able to bring that up. Do
Oh
you have
yeah,
any oh sorry. Do you have any
oh
cool stories on the grounds crew before we move on?
oh yeah, absolutely. So funny story, and we so one time, uh I mean, it was funny for me. I don't know if it was funny for Mark Hendrickson because ball flies out of I think the ball flies out of the bullpen or whatever. Somebody was throwing a ball to like a center to one of the center fielders. I don't think Adam Jones was playing that night, but Mark Hendrickson was on the team, and so I pick up the baseball, and this is during like right before the game is about to start. I go and pick up the baseball, try to toss it back into the bullpen. I almost knocked Mark Hendrickson out. And like he looks back at me, he's like, he had his head turned, and I didn't realize he had his head turned until the last second once I let the ball go. And I'm like, man, I hope I don't hit him. And it landed maybe about a foot away from him. He just gave me this long death stare. And then I went back up to the bullpen after when we had to change over into the bullpen as groundskeepers. And I'm like, man, Mark, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. He was like, I know, but he was like, next time I got to teach you how to throw a little bit better. so, so yeah, he laughed about it after a while, but at first I'm like, I really hope I don't hurt this guy.
Yeah, man. So 1057, you move on there. That is the number one radio station for Baltimore, for the Baltimore area. What's it like, and what's the reaction from your friends and your family who they hearing your voice and they seeing your name on 1057's website?
Well, so that was a cool part. Just talk. My stepfather listens to 1057 every day. When like non-pandemic, like when he's going to work, wakes up in the morning, listens to 1057.
Mm-hmm.
So it was so interesting to be able to, get on 1057, do updates occasionally, and then cut audio all the time for for like the station and everything. I mean, because a lot of those cuts, we'd ask questions, and sometimes they'd run out questions in the cuts of the audio for the answers that they used. So one time I asked a question, and I'll never forget Jerry Coleman. For the Big Bad Morning Show, he used my question in the audio, and he was like, "This is from." Our Ravens reporter Kyle Andrews. I'm like, man, this is so cool. Like he used my name on a radio station with my audio, with my voice and everything. And it gave me a little bit more recognition. And then next thing you know, I'm doing videos and stuff for 1057 on the Facebook page, on Twitter. And I'm just like, this is so cool, to be able to get that recognition from, local media and even national media at times. I mean, Bleacher Report started running my stuff a lot of times when I would start tweeting. Bleacher Report would say, okay, this tweet about the Ravens is attributed to Kyle Andrews. So it was so crazy to see.
Yeah, man. I thought that was really cool. It's always fun when you see your friends and hear your friends doing well. And there was times where I wasn't listening to the radio as much, but I know you would let us know, and I would try to make sure. Like, I'm driving, and I'm like, oh, that's Kyle, giving an update. And so, I thought that was cool. Did you have, how would you say working at Fox prepared you for what you would do with 1057?
So I would say working at Fox definitely got me in a groove of being able to talk to professional athletes on a regular basis.
Hmm.
Because I think doing I already did the Orioles, so I'm like, all right, next thing is the Ravens, you know, and I think getting into the Ravens was a little bit tougher just because it was like the NFL is a lot more uptight than the MLB. I don't care what anybody says. Some people are
Facts.
like the MLB is so hard to deal with, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, no. The NFL is so tough to deal with sometimes, especially with you have way more media members coming to practices every day. And then during game day, it's about 70, 80 people in the press box. You know, and that stuff it's just a completely different situation in terms of that. But if you have, that ability to work with professional athletes in one sport, the other things will come easily to you eventually. And then not only that, I will say this right now, and it's a little bit unfair, but like I'm walking in there, I'm 6'7". They're gonna look at me a little bit differently than they're gonna look at somebody that's smaller, and that might not be that. I don't think that's fair at all,
Hmm.
and I don't think it's fair, that people treat women a little bit differently
Speak on it.
well, a lot differently, not even just a little bit, but women get treated completely differently, especially in NFL and circles and some of the other sports as well. But with me, I just walked in there. I felt like I belong here. I have to have some sort of confidence in myself, and just listen back and make sure I'm like I said, listening to the other reporters. Like I know one person that I'll always respect for helping me out is Aaron Cassinets from Penn Live, who covers the Ravens. And so Aaron's only a year older than me, but some of the knowledge that he just dropped on me about, covering the team and, and it was his first year on a beat. That was the funniest part about it. This man knew exactly what to do on his first year on a Ravens beat I think he covered the Eagles prior to that for Penn Live. And he just knew what he was doing right off the bat. But he helped me out tremendously, and I always thank him. And then of course you got Mark Viviano. Mark Viviano is an awesome person. Viv, I'll always respect his grind. Same thing with Jeff Strebeck and you know all the other guys. I can't name. It's so many people I can name that were on that beat that I'm like, man, they really did help me on a regular basis and really looked out for me. So I respect all those people.
Yeah, man. Shout out to Mark Viviano. Just somebody I know when I was at Fox, he was sitting there doing his video. And, me and Hugh, we were on the field or early in the Orioles season. And after he finished, he came over and just talked to us, sparked the conversation. Now, here's somebody I grew up watching, admiring. WJZ was the number one station in my house. And for him to take the time out, he said, so, he asked me our names. He said, all right, well, I'm going to give you a shout out on Twitter. And I grew some followers that day. And I always appreciated that from him. You talked about how, women not being treated fairly. As an ally, because I know you, like myself, we've been very outspoken on how women, especially in journalism, and I say especially in journalism because it's the field that we're in. Can you talk about just ways that we can improve and show people how they can improve their allyship?
Well, first we got to lift women up. I mean, that's number one. We got to put them in a position to succeed. Just like some people will take a position, you know, they'll take the position of being able to lift people of color up to get to that point too. So I mean, it doesn't matter. Like I told people this, especially, it really stinks. Sometimes you see a lot of women. You'll see women in the industry, but one thing that is that we don't see enough of is more black women in the industry. And I think if you find you know a black woman that wants to be a sports journalist, or maybe she might not even be a sports journalist, but tell her she can be a sports journalist. and support her, and that's something that I wish I would see more of in this industry is more Black women in the industry. Because I look at people like my sister and my mom and some of my friends as well, and so many people that we close with as well in our group chat, that I'm like, man, if somebody gave them the ability to just succeed in this field and lift them up to the point, because I mean we need to help each other out. It's just as simple as that. And then not only that, but calling people out on things. If somebody asks something that's out of pocket, or says something that's out of pocket to a woman that's a reporter, you got to check them on that. You can't just allow things to fly sometimes, because I mean I didn't see it as much in the locker room,
Hmm.
with some of the players. Usually the players are pretty they'll hold them accountable for things that they say. Because I mean, 9 times out of 10, a lot of the PR people are usually women. But I think when it comes to other reporters, we got to hold the other reporters accountable too. Because sometimes it just is it's not right, and we'll hear something and we'll be like, man, we can't really do anything because that they don't work for the company that we work for, and we shouldn't get involved. No, you got to speak up. You got to speak up on those women. I mean, that woman's behalf. Especially since sometimes they don't want to. I mean, they don't want to be put in a position where their job is in jeopardy because some man said something that was, wild to them, and that's not fair at all. And we got to do better when it comes to those things. So, I just think it's a multifaceted way of supporting women and also speaking out. When somebody does something against them, that we have to keep those two things in mind, one first and foremost.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head because a lot of times people are scared. Well, if I say something, I'm gonna be, people gonna look at me crazy. It goes back to the schoolyard, right?
Mm.
When you see the bully, you're cool with the bully, but you see him teasing somebody else, but you don't want to say nothing to him because you want to keep your popular, you want to keep your clout. And I just, I always said enough is enough, And I look at it like, shoot, I call people out. What they gonna do? Hit me in my mouth?
Right, they're not gonna do anything.
and,
Are they
and
not? I mean, and 9 times out of 10, they're not gonna check us. They're not gonna come back and check us. You
mhm.
know, and what are they gonna check us about doing the right thing? so, so
Ex-
yeah.
exactly. So now you moved on to the the flagship paper for the Baltimore City area, well, really Maryland, and that is the Baltimore Sun. Can you tell me how that opportunity came about, and what did it feel like? It's like Kyle Andrews on the Baltimore Sun.
So, I guess the first thing that got to me when I wrote for the Sun was that first article that I did that ended up in the paper, and I was covering your alma mater, City,
Yeah, man.
and they were playing against Poly, and City won the Baltimore City baseball championship, and I saw my name in a byline on the Baltimore Sun, right on I think it was the third page of the sports section, and I'm like, wow, you know, I used to grow up getting press clippings all the time. Me and my grandmother, when I'll never forget when we had when the Ravens won the Super Bowl the first time around, we took all the press clippings from the Ravens Super Bowl, their run to the Super Bowl, and we had like this banner that we made, and it was like on a purple sheet, and it was all Baltimore Sun press clippings of the Ravens. And then for me to go and take see my name in that same paper 20 years later or 19 years later at that point, it was just so cool to see. And I was excited about it. And you know, I just I mean it shook me. I was just like, I can't believe this is happening. But after a while, I felt like I definitely belong. At the Sun. I got into it pretty quickly. It's my first time writing for a newspaper professionally, so that was different. But as you know, I only had maybe one month of normalcy before all the stuff came down. Just literally a month after I started working with the Sun.
Yeah, man. Now, what was it like when you went there and the first time you went in this Baltimore Sun building and you saw some of the classic papers? What was your thoughts? Like, I interned there. Did you when you started, were you on the Calvert Street location or they had already moved?
They had already moved at
Oh,
that
okay.
point.
Okay. Yes, and
Yeah,
I went to the new location as well. But you talk about what it that what it felt like when you saw like all the classic papers throughout the whole, I mean, they go back as far as, some of the tragedies, like Kennedy getting killed, Martin Luther King getting killed, but also you had the Orioles winning the World Series, the Ravens winning the Super Bowl. What was it like when you saw that collage?
well, it's so wild seeing you walk past and then it's like just organized by year that it happened,
Hmm.
like big situations. And so one of the things I walk by I walk by every time I come in there, and it's when Osama bin Laden was killed. And I'll never forget when I sat in class as that happened. I remember the Sun reported on it as it was happening as well, and had like a running like log of things that were going on after he got killed. And then I see that, walking past that, and I'm like, wow, I was in high school when this was written. And then you go back to some of the other things that you've seen that you experienced yourself, and then you see the Sun reported on it. Or you'll see, multiple other things where, the Sun is reported on it, and you're like, wow, this local paper that I'm now writing for has done all these, different things that were, you know, influential moments in my life. Like when Obama got elected, that was a big one. Um, you know, and I guess Charlottesville was another one that they had in there too. Just seeing some of those things, like moments that played out in your life, and then seeing those turn around and be stories on a wall that your paper covered is just is wild.
Yeah, man. And I thought that was, when I saw it, I was like, this is just amazing. And I think, sometimes on my downtime, I would go over there and, in the old building and just look, and just kind of like take it in because as we're news nerds. So, like you said, you took clippings and, it's to see that all together. It's like, wow, like this place been around for a long time. What
Oh
was
yeah.
so just talking about high school sports, what is I guess a trick to the trade to really get to learn, the high school sports, the top players and whatnot? Because generally everybody when they want to do sports journalism, the first thing they think of is the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, the NHL. But we know you start with high school sports. And it's really good because it helps you understand it better. What was some of the tricks to the trade for you to really understand like who were the go-to players and whatnot in town?
Well, so it's funny because even before I started on my high school sports beat, I actually started watching some of the best players because I was just like, I just had some extra time to, roam around, especially on Friday nights. I think little do people know with, covering the Ravens and everything, you get out of there pretty early on Fridays out of the facility. So that gave me a lot of time to watch, high school football games. And one person that everybody told me to watch was Dante Thornton from Mount St. Joe. And so watching Dante play that year prior to me even covering the team, I think that gave me a good idea because I'm like, maybe I got to follow this kid on Twitter, see what he's up to, because who knows, he might end up going to school locally around here. And as time went on, I kind of got to know some of these other athletes that were playing in the area that year prior to me even covering the players. Because I think a lot of times, a lot of like, if you're a college reporter or if you're a pro reporter, you don't have the time to kind of look at those high school kids because you're just like, what are they, until they make it to the league, do we really even need to pay attention to them? And I think that, that's something that we have to, you have to be able to have an eye for talent to an extent, to be able to find these kids. And I think that in Baltimore, we have so much talent on the basketball circuit when it comes to girls and boys basketball. As we know, Poly's girls basketball team knocked off St. Francis, and St. Francis was the number 2 team in the country.
Mhm.
So, the public schools are great. The private schools are great with basketball, football and lacrosse, volleyball even. I mean, it's soccer. And I think we have so much talent in this area, and it's a litany of talent that all you have to do is just look it up. You just go on Rivals or 24/7 Sports, and you see all of these, top rated athletes, and a lot of them are from Maryland. Either from DC in the DMV area or up in Baltimore.
Yeah, man. Now we're in the midst of a pandemic, and sports is really canceled for the most part. They announced today as we record this, or yesterday, that the public high school will not be having sports in for the fall winter semesters. What are some things you've been able to do as a sports reporter to still cover these athletes?
So every athlete's out there training right now. Everybody's getting out there, putting in their work. And I think that, as high school sports reporters, you want to get creative just as much as the athletes are getting creative with putting out their tape and getting recruited. And we've been working on stories about training facilities, you know, the camps that kids are still going to. I mean, that's, neither here nor there. I wouldn't go to a camp, but I'm also immunocompromised, so I'm not putting myself in that situation. But kids are going to camps, kids are training, kids are doing all this other stuff and getting innovative with what they want to do. And I think that that's something, I think a lot of other sports reporters could do during this time. I've seen a lot of sports reporters have to pivot the news because, that's kind of the direction of what the papers want you to do. And that's fine and all. But if they still want you to cover sports things, you don't have to, figure out what you don't have to, have a live event to be able to cover a sport. You could still find other things to cover, and then they are still live events that are being played. For instance, like Baltimore, we got a soccer team that's playing right now. FC Baltimore just had their first match against Maryland Bobcats FC. And Maryland Bobcats FC actually just became the first men's professional team in Maryland. So, we have a professional men's soccer team. The NWSL was still going on. The WNBA is still going on. It's so many things that you could write about right now and use for TV too. I think sometimes when we watch, TV, especially locally, sometimes I feel like, we get so caught up in the men's sports that are going on. But when the Wizards are bad and the Mystics just won the championship last year, why are you not throwing the Mystics on there? Why are you not throwing the Spirit on there? Because I mean, Rose Lavelle played in the World Cup. Elena Deladon won the MVP, and you're not putting the Mystics on TV. And I think part of it is just because everyone's like, oh yeah, well, this is the status quo. Everybody always talks about men's sports, all that other stuff. It's women playing basketball right now, just like the men. You know, is other things going on in the area that you can watch out for. Kids are training for high school. Kids are training for college. The college athletes don't know what's going on. You could cover, some of the things going on with the local bars and everything because sports might not happen. And, how have they been affected? How's business been affected by, the lack of, I guess, people coming in for a training camp or whatever in different areas. Like, for instance, in Pittsburgh, you got, they go to St. Vincent College. How are the areas or, the hotels affected by, Steelers camp not happening? I mean, it's so many things you could do with this.
You mentioned that you were immunocompromised. We saw that recently. I and forgive me for the time because you obviously know it's been such a long year, but you
Oh
rang
yeah.
the bell, beating cancer. Um, how did you manage to balance? Because you still worked and you still did a phenomenal job covering. If I'm not mistaken, you were diagnosed almost right after you started with the Baltimore Sun.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, I kind of alluded to it before. It was like maybe about a month and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm like, man, how did you know? I mean, when they told me what the situation was, and so it was just so wild because I got hired at the beginning of the month in May, and then at the end of the month, my primary care physician told me that I might have lymphoma. He was like, it's a 90 something percent chance that you have lymphoma. And I'm freaking out because I knew exactly what lymphoma meant. And I'm like, I pray to God that it's not, I didn't know the difference between I think the biggest thing was that I didn't know the difference between Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And luckily for me, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma and that was the better one to have. I mean, so many other athletes have recovered from it. Regular people have recovered from it. It's a 95% chance of survival. And I mean, but at the time, you don't know what'll go on with that stuff. You don't know. I had to get a biopsy. I had to get a port implanted in my chest, and I still have the port like in the left upper part of my chest. And that stuff was tough. Like knowing that you had cancer right after you got hired to what was your dream job, that's tough. That's extremely tough. And I mean, I had to deal with that. But, I thought about, I think one thing that got me through it was, just having the support that I had. Everybody reached out to me. I had, a lot of athletes reached out to me. Adam Jones, of course, was one of the first people that, responded to my tweet. And I appreciate him for doing that. And then after he responded, a bunch of people from Baltimore all, came out to support me, telling me, hey, Kyle, like, we're behind you. And, that meant a lot. Other journalists, I mean, you were one of the first people that reached out to me too. Um, so like all those things, I mean, it meant a lot to me. And I appreciate you all, for looking out for me as always. And, I got through it. I had to work a lot. I worked all the way through having cancer though. That was the one thing that I think back to myself. I'm like, how did I do that? How did I get that done? Especially, having chemo. I had one game where I think it was against St. Mary's versus St. Vincent Pallotti, and I covered the game literally 2 days after I had chemo. And if anybody's ever had chemo, and if you haven't had chemo, I mean, one thing that I will say is that having chemo and then your body, it takes about a week to recover fully. And having it going to a game 2 days, so I had to drive myself all the way down to Laurel to go cover a game 2 days after I had chemo, and I'm up there sweating bullets. It's like it wasn't even that hot outside. It was like October, like early October, maybe might have been about 70 degrees, high 60s or so. I'm out there sweating bullets, and I'm like, man, I feel like I'm about to puke, you know, and I got through it somehow. But those things, it was a long year. Last year was a long year for me, and this year has been even longer somehow. So
Did you take time off? Like, do you remember recalling taking any days off while you was, battling cancer?
Yeah, so like what I did was that I did take a couple days off. When I was dealing with, the cancer and everything and the chemo. I think the most important thing was just to try to get my health back to, complete normal. I think a lot of times, people just expect they're like, oh yeah, you're getting chemo, you know, how does it usually feel? And it doesn't feel the same way every time. And I think that's something that isn't necessarily explained, um, you know, by a lot of other people. I mean, people will just tell you like I had it one way and this is how it is. And I'm just like, no, everybody handles the chemo differently. Like I handle it one way. We had two of my other coworkers, they both had cancer too, and they handled chemo a completely different way than I did. Some of at first, I mean, mine was weird in the sense that, it took me, I was okay the first couple times I had chemo, but I would say that the last few times I would get really sick and I looked terrible at one point. You know, you get really bloated from the chemo and stuff. I think it's another side effect people probably don't realize is just because, when you get chemo, you actually now because of the drugs and the steroids and everything that they give you, you actually gain a lot of fat from the chemo. Just a little known fact. That's something that they don't tell you prior to that. But it was weird. I had a, I felt bloated a lot of times. I felt sick. But I barely took any. I don't recall taking any real time off. Some days I wouldn't work, but I would just use that as my regular like weekend, I guess. And everything else worked out in the end, luckily.
How did
So
you how did you deal with that mentally? Because you had just came off a weight loss.
right.
You had went on a great weight loss. You dropped a lot of weight, and then boom, you now you get cancer. You deal with chemo. You put on weight. How did that affect you mentally?
I was frustrated for sure. I had just gotten hernia surgery, 3 months of me even getting diagnosed with chemo. So, I couldn't go to the gym for a while. I was like, man, I hadn't been to the gym normally for about a year and a half. And I was frustrated. I was just like, I gotta get done with this stuff so I can get back to the gym. And then now we got the we got the pandemic and I still can't go to the gym. So it's been a long road that I'm just like, dang, this stuff, it's just bad luck, you know? And that's all I can look at it as. I can't even be upset because I'm just like, this is what, life is thrown at me. This is what I got to deal with. I got to get through it. But, I won't blame anyone for, being upset and distraught about the situation at hand.
Oh, okay. So, man, just looking back at your career, looking back at life so far, obviously you have a lot more to accomplish, but so far, what would you say has been your glass breaking moment where you realized that you was meant for this business?
I think my glass breaking moment was when I I was actually, I mean, I'll say it a couple. Um, I think it was about a couple weeks ago, and I wrote this story. Actually, it was last week, and this story that I wrote about the demo tape. Um, their local blog that I don't think they don't get enough credit for some of the work that they do. They post a lot of local artists and everything, but you know, I, I looked at some of the comments that I got back from a lot of people that read my stuff, and they're like, "Man, Kyle, you did something big for the Baltimore community when it came to rap and stuff." And you know, knowing a lot of the people that I've seen like come up and do this work, because I mean those were all St. Joe guys that all were involved in that too. And seeing that work and seeing people, you know, respect the work that I put in to like, give these guys some credit. That really that hit home, because, these were guys I, really, to be completely honest, grew up with and watched them grow themselves. And then now, all these other people are just like, man, he gave us this story about, this blog and the, the hip hop community and stuff in the area. Um, or not even a blog, but a article, and that was just huge. That was big time.
And what does it mean to be able to do this at home? A lot of times reporters gotta move from state to state, go in a different environment, and they are successful. But for you to be able to do this at home, what does it mean?
Man, it was different, to be completely honest. I mean, so many people tell me about how, they bounce from state to state. I talked with Glenn Clark. Glenn went to Arizona at one point, and sometimes I'm like, man, how different would it have been had I gone somewhere else? Would I be able to be as good as I am now? With certain respects, with my work, would I be able to, reach the same audience that I'm getting now? And part of me, I'm like, I don't think I think sometimes I can, but then, you never really know. I truly don't know how different it would have been, I guess, just because I never really got the chance to know, how different it is,
Hmm.
and to see some of the, the growth that I could have made, being somewhere else. And I think it gives you a different experience being able to, cover your hometown and cover where you're from. And you have a deeper understanding of, some of the things that went on. I mean, in Baltimore, like, I wouldn't have been able to do that demo tape story if I wasn't from here. You know, I wouldn't have been able to cover some of the things that I covered to the same extent that I covered them if I wasn't from here. I'm not saying you have to be from here, but it definitely helps, especially covering this city. I think a lot of times we kind of look towards the outside to get some answers on things, and we had the answers right in front of us.
Yeah. And before you go, let the people know where they can follow you.
You can follow me at Kyle J Andrews _ on Twitter. I have a podcast. You joined us for the podcast. That was awesome, man. It's called Mobtown Blitz. On Mobtown Pod, that's the podcast Twitter. So just check that out. And we talk, sports in Baltimore. We talk sports in general. So just give us a listen and check us out.
Yeah, folks, check him out. Make sure you check out his writings, his articles. Subscribe to the Baltimore Sun. I promise you'll get great content there, Kyle. It's definitely been a pleasure, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you, Brian.
No problem. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is my episode with Kyle Andrews. Make sure you check out his work over at the Baltimore Sun Media Group. Make sure you support local journalists. Coming up next week, I'm bringing on somebody I went to high school with. I actually graduated with my wife, and that is Anthony Johnson. Anthony is a certified NBA agent. So he comes on to share what that process was like, what it was like going through the testing for the NBA and the NFL as well. So you definitely want to tune into that episode. As you know, we need more black agents in sports. So remember, do not let anybody set up a ceiling that you can't break through. This podcast was recorded and edited by B Waters Productions. The music by Hypno Beats. Make sure you follow him at Hypno_Beats with a Z on Instagram.